College Football Nerds here talking Ohio State and Oregon Part 2 with the 12-team playoff. You're going to have some rematches. And Josh, we thought we might have this one in the Big Ten Championship game, but instead we're getting it in the playoffs. I've got Josh, and he's going to get nerdy with y'all, and we just want to talk ball for a little bit. And on this one, I think it's an interesting discussion because you have this Ohio State team that's coming in that just blew the doors off of Tennessee. We both picked Ohio State, and our model picked it big. I picked it a little closer. But you've also got this Oregon team that has really just been resting for a month. And in your opinion, Josh, I think you really have the best of both scenarios coming into this game. You've got one team that took full advantage of their first round game and are coming in super hot and look like they're really tuned up. And then you've got a team that's had the bye, so they have a really long rest and preparation time. Which one would you prefer to be? Would you prefer to be the team that's coming in off the round one game that they had to play at home, got a blowout win, or the team that got to rest and really scout for a whole month?
When you're dealing with rematches in general, I think things are always kind of tough to evaluate. The common consensus is you never want to play the same team twice, which I think a lot of times is due more to the fact that if you're playing somebody twice, they're probably pretty good. I think you almost always want the bye. I think there is something to be said about being in a position where you stay warm or stay hot and stay in rhythm offensively. But Daniel, I think the advantage that's given in terms of maybe playing earlier, if there is one, might be a situation like Texas, where they're not playing high-level teams on a weekly basis. They don't have to have that emotional outlay. I don't think they're that up for Clemson, and they're not going to be that up for Arizona State. And they can get more up, and assuming they win, and probably a pretty good chance due to work and baby obligations, they may not end up doing the Arizona State-Texas game. But the long story short, it shouldn't surprise anybody. I expect Texas is going to win that game. I don't think you can run a one-man show through Scatabo versus a high-level team. I think that's the reality, and probably a preview for whether or not we do it. Same kind of deal with the Boise State game. Even though I think Arizona State and Boise State are good teams, they're one-dimensional, and you can't use one player versus an elite team and win. But in Oregon's case, they're playing an Ohio State team that played Tennessee and dominated Tennessee. But they dominated Tennessee in a game where they played the best game they played all season. And something I talk about a lot, Daniel, is in these sorts of games, I think sometimes we get a little too over our skis in the performance somebody has in a game where they played the best game of the season. So when I say that, yards per attempt, Daniel, 10.2 yards per attempt on Tennessee, 317 yards passing, 80% completion percentage. Now, I know Howard has been top 3, top 5 completion percentage all season. I don't know where he's at right now, probably somewhere around third. But still, when you talk about playing high-level competition, there's no other game where he played a high-level opponent where he put up 10 yards per attempt. Even the first Oregon game, which is a highly offensively minded game, it was 9.3. But I think there's something to be said that Tennessee defense we really thought could give Ohio State a really good game. I made the point that I thought the game could be close, but I was really concerned with Tennessee's offense. And I said there was about an even shot that Tennessee was going to be able to score at all, and a pretty good shot that they get shut out, which, somebody clipped that from us on Twitter and with our permission, which I appreciate. And that was the reality of it. But to then turn around and try to replicate that performance where they ran for 4.7 yards per carry, threw for over 10 yards per attempt on what is almost certainly a top 5 defense nationally this year is hard. And emotionally to recover from that, and what is really not an overly long period of time, because we're talking about, what is about 9-10 days between these games, is also really hard. Whereas Oregon gets to sit there, they get to scout, they get to rest their players, they're not banged up. I think all those things coming together in a game that is a rematch where they're going to be emotionally invested definitely benefits Oregon. And I think there's something to be said about the momentum that Ohio State gained in the Tennessee game, and they can carry that forward. But Daniel, I'll turn that to you. How much, when you see a performance like that, like Tennessee had against, or Ohio State had against Tennessee, how much do you think that that carries forward. And I know all the Big Ten fans right now are screaming, well, obviously Tennessee sucks. I don't think Tennessee sucks at least not that bad. I will say in our power ratings, they're like the fifth best SEC team. Um, but they're still a good team, and more importantly, a very good defense. And Ohio State put up the best offensive performance, in my opinion, they put up all year. Do you think that's something they can carry forward? Or do you think that's a spike? Or do you think it's going to be just completely random whether or not they can carry forward and trying to hyperanalyze it's a lost cause?
I don't think they have to carry it forward to that extent. Like they won that game a billion and 3-7, right? They don't have to play so far out in front of their opponent, in this case being Oregon, and perfectly replicate that. But they do need to take some things away from that game that to be able to beat Oregon or to play on the same level as they were when they played in the first time. Namely, they need that patchwork offensive line to hold up, and they need Howard to. Howard was out of his mind a little bit in the way that Michael Penix was against Texas last year in the playoff game. That guy was good all year, but that game he was just special. If either of these quarterbacks plays, because neither quarterback played their best game in the first game, Oregon and Ohio State. Neither played their best game. Both played good games. Howard played the best game of his career by a margin against Texas. If either one of those quarterbacks has their best game again in this game, that team's going to win. I do want to take a step back, though, because I think this is something we overlooked, and it caught us by surprise in this Ohio State Tennessee game. And it comes back to something I said in sort of our recap of those games, in that hard schedules and hard games make easy games hard. Who did Ohio State play the game before they played Michigan? They played Indiana. Who did they play the game before they played and beat Nebraska 21-17? They played Penn State. And I think you got a version of Ohio State in those two games. If you look at it, their whole season, those two games are
They actually played Oregon before Nebraska, but yeah.
Sorry, it was Oregon. Those games were complete outliers for the rest of their season, right? And so I think that's something that we didn't really look at when we looked at the Tennessee game, because Tennessee, they had an easier schedule, at least as far as SEC goes. Ohio State, we kept looking back and like, oh well, if they're bad enough to play this close to Nebraska and to lose to Michigan, I think that there's a very good chance that Alabama blows Michigan out, because talk about coming off of buys and coming off a rest. Alabama has been that team that's been really good at it this year, and they've actually sucked at it under Nick Saban. I wouldn't be surprised if Alabama beats Michigan by multiple scores, but in no way do I think that means Alabama is better than Ohio State. I think Alabama is actually probably 7 to 10 points worse, if not more, in terms of point spread against Ohio State. And I think that all comes back to this whole notion of who you are after a big game. And there are letdowns, and there are situations where a team is getting to prepare for you in a way that you can't prepare for them, that I do think benefits Oregon. However, I don't think that advantage is amplified as much as it is in the regular season when you got games back to back to back to back, given that Ohio State has had a longer than normal break to prepare for a team that they've already played. Having said all of that, do you think that let's say Oregon is rusty coming out of the gate? Like, do you think they can afford to go to sleep for a quarter and be down 10, 13 to nothing, or are they one of the few teams that's really equipped to come back from a hole if that happens?
I mean, I think both these teams have enough weapons to come back, and I think they figured out those weapons over the course of the season. I mean, Tez Johnson got banged up at Oregon. He's the kind of guy that you can't really cover. And, I'm trying to think, TCU's had a guy or two like that. Ohio State's had guys like Olave, but he's kind of a different guy. I'm trying to think. I mean, I hate to use the Alabama example, but Jalen Waddle, maybe. There's a speed, quickness thing at play with Johnson that he's kind of uncoverable. And I will say that when they've played secondaries that don't have really top end speed, at times that's gotten exposed. I think that happened with Penn State in a way that Penn State never really had been challenged. They could not run with Johnson. It was really obvious. But on the other side of the ball, Daniel, Ohio State's definitely figured out their weapons a lot better. I mean, I think midway through the season, they didn't really know what they had. And if you look at Jeremiah Smith, who's now, you know, Ibuka has a couple more receptions, but Smith by far has the most yards. You know, he was getting used midseason, 9 receptions in the original Oregon game, but I feel like they've used him more downfield. So, for example, Northwestern, he 100 yards, but only on 4 receptions. He had 100 yards in Oregon, but on 9. 103 on Tennessee on just 6. It's the willingness to throw to him downfield, the trust they've placed in that, the fact that they realize that he can beat guys deep. Probably some of that comes from route running and timing. Has opened up their offense. Because, I mean, to be clear, it's a good receiving core in general. I mean, most teams would kill to have Ibuka on your team, much less to have him as your number 2. Tate is a great number 3. They've got depth. They've got Henderson. Scott at tight end. I mean, they're a really, really good group. So I think both these teams, Daniel Evan Stewart, right? He was a guy at Texas A&M that had some real issues with motivation, but I think both of us felt like he was a true impact player when he was on. And he's the second receiver at Oregon. These teams can come back from holes with that kind of receiver talent. And we've talked about for years, really, I don't know, maybe 8 years or so, dominant wide receiver talent has been the clear differentiator between teams at the elite level in college football. These two teams have it. They've got elite receiver talent. If you've got that kind of talent, you can score very quickly at any point. I think both the quarterbacks, to me, Daniel, are kind of similar. They're both mobile guys. They're both very experienced guys. They can make heady plays. I don't know if either one of them has plus arm talent by an NFL standard. If you're talking C.J. Stroud, neither one of these guys is going to rifle a ball in a tiny window on a consistent basis the way Stroud did. But they're both gamers. They're both willing to run. They're both willing to take a hit, get a first down. And they understand the offense well enough to throw downfield, and they've gained the trust to do it. So I think, to answer your question, I think either one of these teams, if they're down in a hole, they can come back. And tipping my hat off a little bit on how that goes from a, perception standpoint, Daniel, both these teams have a lot of explosiveness on offense and a lot of explosiveness on defense. There's a lot of disruption on the defensive fronts, both for Oregon and for Ohio State. And this does feel like a game that's going to be about explosives on both sides. And I think there is a chance that you could see runs almost like a basketball game. But there are two things I want to flag to you out of that discussion. The first, the over-under is only 55 points, which I find interesting because it's saying a game in the mid to upper 20s is what you're betting on, which based on that discussion, you'd say it'd be over easily, but that's not the case. And two, in view of that, I think there may be something to the fact that these defenses are so disruptive. Ohio State, I think, got better defensively as the year went on, and they got more banged up on the offensive line, which didn't matter against Tennessee, but might matter here. I mean, do you think there's something to be said that as explosive as the offenses are, arguably the defenses are just as explosive themselves?
I think that Vegas thinks that. The line also has really kind of stayed steady around that 2 point number, this time in favor of Ohio State. I think I saw somebody post, maybe it was Kyle Lamb, that said the rematch, when two good teams rematch in the regular season, the result is almost always like the winning team loses like 3 points or something, 4 points off of the margin they had in the winning final score. And nothing's perfect. When it's that close, one ball bounce in either direction could win the game. But I do think Ohio State is better defensively now than they've been at any point in the season. I mean, even in the Michigan loss, that game was won because Michigan, got a kind of a lucky interception on their side of the field and had a 7-yard touchdown drive. Like, that was a great defensive performance. And I wonder, though, if Vegas is saying 55, Vegas is saying a tight game, like usually when that happens and we think that makes a lot of sense, our model sometimes says something different and we sometimes say something different. So to me, I think the number's right. I don't think it's going to be as high scoring as it was before. I think in these bigger games now, based on where offenses are and defenses are in college football right now, I think defenses are a little bit ahead. Since it's rematch, there's a lot of scouting that's going on between these two teams. I do expect it to be lower scoring than the last one, but maybe get us the model and tell us what the model thinks and maybe what you think.
Our model, for those of you turning it for the first time, because it's a playoff season, you can go to collegefootballnerds.com. You can run the model in any two teams you want. We try to keep the data updated ourselves. Usually takes a day or two for it to process, but up to date right now. It has this game 26.4 to 17.5, so about a 9-point advantage for Ohio State. And understand the way this model works. It looks only at your team's on-field performance this year. We throw out FCS data. And we don't look at recruiting rankings. We don't look at prior year. It is a current year trend line. There are advantages and disadvantages to that. I know Andrew Percival has done some interesting work and looking at various models. We have one of the highest success rates against the spread in terms of just pick rate. I think we're somewhere around 54% right now, which is really good for a computer model. But in terms of mean error, we're not great. We're probably in the bottom third of models. And what that means is that we're a little off in terms of picking the score, but we're really good at figuring out, in terms of modeling, where the trends are for a given team in terms of who's going to beat the point spread overall. It just may overpredict or underpredict. To that point, Daniel, our model had Ohio State a 20-point favorite over Tennessee, which for a model was crazy because those two teams are pretty closely power rated. But that gets to the nature of our model as a trend predictor. It also gets to the fact that the way our model is coded, it's not just like simple points per yard. We've created this entire set of statistics on expected performance, meaning how you did against your opponents versus how they did against everybody else, to create sort of a percentage-based set of stats, right? You're 20% better than average rushing. You're 10% worse than average rushing. That's completely opponent adjusted. And those are the stats we usually try to refer to because I think they're useful and interesting. Also, I think unique in the entire space. Haven't seen anybody else in the industry copy us on those stats. But it also, I think, does a really good job of figuring out just the way it's structured, and there's a machine learning kind of component to the way it generates scoring models for each team, that some teams frequently have points at which their offense starts and stops working. That effectively teams tend to have scaling issues sometimes where their offense is really effective if it's moving, and if it drops below a certain level, it falls off a cliff. Or some offenses can generate a lot of yards but not a lot of points, and there's a certain point where option offenses need to be at a certain level to be effective, and if they fall just from 4 yards of play to 3 yards per play, scoring can fall off dramatically. And in that regard, what it's suggesting is that Oregon may have a little bit of an issue here, because that has Ohio State at 6.3 yards per play, has Oregon at 5. And it just thinks that Ohio State's kind of at a bit of a yardage tier than Oregon is, and its projection is Ohio State pretty considerably. And now let me walk through those opponent-adjusted metrics. I mean, our system has Ohio State 7th in both rushing and pass offense. It has them 4th in pass defense and 2nd in run defense, which has them the number 1 overall defense in the country, the number 4 overall offense. Oregon is good, but they're not that good. Offensively, they're the number 8 passing offense, the number 15 run offense, the number 6 overall. Defensively, they're the number 11 defense, number 19 against the pass, but only number 57 against the run in our metrics. And so basically there's one major set of advantages, and that's Ohio State on offense can expected to run the ball well, expected to throw the ball fairly well, whereas when Oregon has the ball, it's a much more even matchup. The other thing I'm going to flag in terms of modeling, Daniel, is we have this thing called a consistency score. If you go look at our model online, and we have a little tooltip that nobody ever reads. But the explanation for that is we take our model and the scoring model we generate for each team, and then we go back and I actually have the model rerun the whole season and then check itself against the results. And a negative consistency score means, in Ohio State's case, negative 61. When the model goes and looks at the scoring model it produces for Ohio State, it cannot get a clean match that actually applies through the whole season. And the reason for that is because no set of variables and levers for Ohio State can ever explain the up and down performance that they've had. they have been an inconsistent team. To the point of the Tennessee game, that was an exceptional game, maybe the best game anybody's played against a top competition in the entire year. And that comes off a rivalry game at the end of the season where they played terribly against a not very good Michigan team. And there's no way a scoring model can predict that. So embedded in this model, Daniel, even though it's got Ohio State 9 points better, and I say this a lot, when you look at point spreads, it's not just a matter of what is the expected score differential. Sometimes that point margin kind of gets bumped up to say, what is the expected chance that Ohio State plays at their ceiling versus not? And to me, Daniel, the model here with all those metrics combined with Ohio State season, I think really comes together to the same point when you look at this consistency score. If Ohio State and Oregon play their A game, the model thinks Ohio State wins by some decent margin. It thinks this is much more likely to be a defensive game than an offensive game. Original game be damned. But it thinks that Ohio State has a high likelihood of not playing to their ceiling in any given game. So there's this big red flag thrown that this game may be more about how much Ohio State plays to their potential than it really actually is the overall average performance of the two teams.
You just described basically every Ohio State team for the last 20 years, though. I think that Ohio State fans would even admit that years like 2017, that team was absolutely stacked. 2015, absolutely stacked with unbelievable talent. Didn't play to their standard. Didn't play at least to their A game. I think under Ryan Day, they've had a lot of that where they didn't play to their A game and they were just pissed off and hungry against Tennessee, and it all came together. And, if for nothing else, if Ohio State doesn't win a national championship this year, which I think that they absolutely can, I'm glad that we got to see Ohio State reach their ceiling. Because I don't think that, maybe 2022 against Georgia, because that was a game that was a coin toss at the end, and that Georgia team was a monster. Maybe that was Ohio State really playing at their ceiling that year. But we've only gotten really small glimpses, and that was a real one. I'm going to pick Ohio State in this game. I don't love the month off. If it were 2 weeks off, I'd like it a little better. We've seen teams come out rusty in these games, in these playoff games, in the 4-team era. I think there's an opportunity for there to be some rust in this situation. And this is a little disconnected, right? Because before, both teams are coming off a long bye, and it was just who handled it better. But now we've got one coming off a bye and one coming off being healthy, coming out of the Tennessee game relatively healthy, and having a little bit of inertia. I also can't get around Oregon giving up 300 yards rushing to Penn State. I feel like Penn State found something on tape and exposed that defense in a way almost like we were talking about Mike Hawkins for Oklahoma today, where when he first came on in relief for Arnold, he was tearing teams up, right? And then people got tape on him and kind of figured him out. Same thing with Jalen Milroe last year. Deep ball and running. Once they figured that out, kind of figured Jalen Milroe out. I wonder if this 300 yards rushing is an indicator that there was some kind of tell or some sort of weakness in this Oregon defense that can be exploited by other teams. And Ohio State has two really good running backs. They have a quarterback that can keep the defense honest and keep them in too high safety. There might be something there. I don't agree with the model, and I wouldn't be surprised if Oregon wins the game. But give me Ohio State 27, Oregon 23. What you got?
For my part, I tip my hand a little bit with the discussion of the model and where this stuff lies, because I do think from an analytics perspective, that's where it lies. Games are played on paper, not on the field. I'm somebody that's very aware of that. And let's be clear, again, called the model a trend predictor. The reason is you use this as a tool to support what your eyeballs see and then to analyze a team. If you're using statistics smartly, the statistics give context and verification for the analysis you're trying to give. Sometimes it's right, sometimes it's wrong. And look, we've gotten stuff right or wrong. I mean, I I'll own up to it, Daniel. I mean, there's times where I've been a little more distracted because, I had a baby in NICU for weeks. I had a wife in the hospital for months. But, when you look at these two teams and you break them down, to me, I think we've all glossed over the offensive line issues that Ohio State has. That Tennessee game was weird. And, I made a comment at some point in passing on something, Daniel, I think in our review video, that I thought, Tennessee still was winning the line of scrimmage. And people thought it was ridiculous because of Ohio State's rush stats. They're probably still going to say that. Look, there's a lot of the same people I will say that called it ridiculous when at one point in the season, the beginning of the season, Daniel, Josh had Oregon above Ohio State even after they nearly lost to Boise, which people thought was absolutely, completely insane, which in terms of on-the-field score and everything was, I think maybe it's evidence that I am actually decent at looking at teams and seeing where the potential are. And I saw an Oregon team that played down to competition, but I also saw the potential that Oregon had. Somehow, sometimes I can see through stuff like that. Don't ask me why. As crazy as it is, my crazy takes are right more often than they're wrong. I don't have a lot of hot takes in general, but when I do have them, sometimes I'm wrong, but I'm probably right 2/3 of the time or more when I actually throw one out there. I think Tennessee got on skates because they had an issue in the perimeter with dealing with the speed of Ohio State's personnel. There was a lot of bootlegs and things. Ohio State constantly moved the pocket. Their run game was all about counters. If you watch them trying to do their power run game, their ISO game, their zone run game, where it's block on block, they did not have much success on Tennessee. Their success came in big pop plays on cutbacks where Tennessee over-pursued, and a lot of that was because that roll-the-pocket pass game got the linebackers moving sideline to sideline. Tennessee had a major injury at linebacker, and I think the personnel just didn't match up well. I think that's fooled us for what is still a genuine issue with Ohio State. I think that line is a problem. I thought it was a problem even earlier in the year a little bit, but then they gelled. They played really well with Simmons at left tackle, and I think they're back in a bad place. And Daniel, there's this guy named Jordan Birch that did not play in the first Ohio State-Oregon game. And so to your point about Oregon getting run on by Penn State, I do not think Oregon is a good tackling team. On tape, when they've played high-level competition, there's a reason Boise State gave them issues. There's a reason Idaho gave them issues. They don't tackle well at times. There's a reason J&T ran for a lot on them. There's a reason, Singleton and Katron Allen did. That only matters if you win the line of scrimmage enough to force tackles in space. The game within a game here, I've said it all season with Ohio State. People have not wanted to buy it, bought into it. Maybe you buy into it now. Ohio State's whole issue is, can you get the ball outside the box? Because when they get the ball outside the box, be it a counter, be it a wheel route, be it a little flare, downfield, whatever, your skill players are better than anybody's defenders, anyone in the country, period. Ohio State has the best set of outside-the-box skill players of anyone in the country. I don't think it's close. Within the box, the offensive line is not phenomenal. Within the box, in the passing game, Howard has some limitations. He can be interception prone. And he's also sometimes a little just clunky. If Oregon gets pressure, I think Ohio State can have trouble operating the way that they like to operate. The Michigan game, people talk about how much Ohio State threw in that game and that they needed to throw the ball more. Daniel, that's a little bit of a misnomer. And I just want to point out to people, they threw the ball 33 times against Michigan. They threw it 31 versus Tennessee. And I know they're in clock kill mode, but the 33 times against Michigan was the most they'd thrown the ball since the Oregon game at the start of October. The problem that they run into is when the offensive line starts losing, and this happens with every team, you start throwing short. Jaden Daniels, his first year at LSU, was this very similar to the player he was his last year he won the Heisman. The offensive line just got better, and that let him throw downfield. He was check down Charlie his first year. He was a downfield thrower his second. So I think there's, you can put on anything you want, SEC being overrated. They won the line of scrimmage versus Tennessee in a way they hadn't normally done. Daniel, I don't think that happens this game. I'm actually going to take Oregon. I'm going to take Oregon 27-20. I think Ohio State runs into a lot more issues than they expect. I think they're coming off a very emotional game. I think they were just as emotionally amped up as you could be. Tennessee came out flat. It was a home game for Ohio State. Tennessee did the most stupid macho thing ever in terms of taking their shirts off and warming up in 20-degree weather. I mean, I know I'm a nerd, but there's a certain level that performance science comes into play, and it's 20 degrees out. Don't let your core body temp lower because you're probably going to play bad football. Um,
Right.
Daniel, I think we're going to see an Ohio State offense that is going to flash in certain plays, but I think they're going to be a lot more disjointed. Now, defensively, I think they're going to be a lot more capable against Oregon, but I think that's going to keep the score lower. And I'm with you. I say 27-20. I think either team could easily win this game. And it's going to come down to who hits the most splash plays. But I do think this is going to be a much lower scoring game. Could be wrong. And I do think we're going to see the effects of the injuries at Ohio State of the offensive line. That's going to push this to be a lower scoring game. And even though they do a better job defensively, I just don't lean towards thinking they can get it done. And I say that
I
with Ohio State thinking they're one of the best teams in the country. A lot of this is the matchup specifically with Oregon and their athleticism. They bring more guys to bear in terms of disruption in the backfield than just about anybody in the country.
yeah, I mean, and Oregon's 13-0, so it's not like we have to make huge exceptions and caveats if we're picking Oregon to win this game. I think Oregon can win. The slight maybe disagreement with you is in how I see this playing out. If Oregon wins, I think it's a little higher scoring. But yeah, I mean, I that it may be a little bit that we're just too much a slave to our model, but I do have that volatility score in the back of my mind. And it is worth noting that, you know, we got what we got out of Ohio State. Like I said earlier in this video, I don't think they have to be as good as they were against Tennessee because they don't have to blow out Oregon. They got to win by 1 point. But also, it's like reverse scaling issues, right? Like that's this maybe an interesting thing to end on is like it doesn't take much when you're playing an elite team. Like let's say Oregon's elite, they are, and Tennessee is a B minus team. It doesn't take much given the quality difference between the two teams, right? I'll let you weigh in on this. For Ohio State to be just a little bit worse, and that score looks dramatically different.
And this gets to what I was saying about the way that these games flow sometimes, especially with spread offenses. And you mentioned Ryan Day playing up and down. His offense is spread heavy, it's RPO heavy, and a lot of it is due to spacing in terms of his success rates and whatnot. The ability of a defense to outflank the offense, to stay in position. Tennessee, I don't know how many times on tape, Daniel, when you go back and watch it, they would run a bootleg with Will Howard, and you just bootleg back around, and they would release the tight end or a back, and Tennessee crashed in the quarterback every single time. And I'm guessing it's something Ohio State staff did a good job of picking up on tape, but it made it kind of easy because you just throw to the back or the tight end. When you play just a little bit better, if the guys cover the back or tight end and make Will Howard be the runner, maybe he gets some yardage, but you don't want Will Howard running that much, and he's going to get run down some. Safety's going to crash down, and suddenly you're going to look a lot better defensively. The gaps at this level, football's a weird sport that when you get to a certain point, again, you hit these freeze. I used to call them stall points. I think Josh Pate took it and ran with it as freeze points. You hit this point where stuff stops working at a certain level, and there's kind of points where offenses accelerate. And like you said, it doesn't take a whole lot of a difference for a lot of the stuff that was dominant for Ohio State in the Tennessee game not to be dominant. And that's, if anybody wants to say that's a crazy thing, you need to just go back and look at the rest of the season because you've seen this all year if you're Ohio State. And I really think spread offenses are particularly susceptible to it because they're so dependent upon spacing and timing, to some degree execution, but mainly just those things in open space. And if a team is able to play down on you and aggressive, they can take away that spacing and suddenly stuff starts kind of getting shut down. So, I don't know, Daniel. I mean, it's certainly a fascinating game. It's one of the most exciting games in the season for sure. The first time around, I don't expect the second game to be any different. And I'm curious right now. I think Texas is the slight favorite to win the national title over Oregon and Ohio State. I'll be curious if the winner of this game isn't picked to be the favorite. That'll be the very interesting thing for me immediately after the game to win the national title. But my gut is to say it is, and it's probably at this point almost more likely than not the winner of this game is the national champion. I'll go ahead and say that, but we'll see because I think there's still more to see about this, and there's 3 more games to play, including this one, which is crazy for both these teams. I think horribly unfair for both of them, given the way the bracket worked out. But yeah, another fun game, and probably the most fun game, most anticipated game in the first 2 rounds of the playoff, bar none, if not the most of the entire playoff, really.
All right, y'all. Let us know what you think about these 2 teams and who's going to win it, and let us know if you think, the whole concept of reverse scaling in this case, how much Ohio State has to play a little bit less than they did against Tennessee for this to be a game, or for them to even lose considerably to Oregon. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week, and God bless.